Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Development Control. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the rear of the room. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. Please note this meeting is being webcast live on the internet. And please switch off your mobile phones or turn them to silent. For the benefit of the members of the public watching or participating in this meeting, I would like to explain who everyone is. My name is Councillor Nick Robinson and I am Chairman of this committee. To my right are councillors who will be making the decisions on the applications on this evening's agenda. To my immediate right and left are officers who will be presenting the applications and providing advice to the committee. The Development Control Committee is a regulatory committee, not a political meeting. The committee will be considering the published papers, examining the evidence brought before us tonight, and will make decisions based on planning reasons. We are guided by national and local planning policy and guidance. At the appropriate time, I will invite speakers to contribute to the meeting in the order set out in the update paper. May I ask all speakers, including visiting members, to speak clearly and keep the points made on the application on material reasons only. No further dialogue between members of the committee and speakers will be permitted once questioning has finished. All speakers will be reminded of their permitted speaking time and will be advised when they have 1 minute remaining. May I ask all committee members to avoid repetition and keep any comments on each planning item to a maximum of 4 minutes. This evening there is one item on the agenda and hopefully we will be able to complete it within 3 hours. I understand that planning can be emotive and ask that everyone remains polite and professional through this evening. And on that fact that it's emotive, I've been asked if we could allow more than 2 questions from members of the committee. We will start with 2 questions maximum from the committee, and if the questions don't go on too long, we may be in a position to extend that. But the questions must be on material planning things, and I understand that contextualising a question is important, but if we can keep that as brief as possible, hopefully we'll be able to get more questions in. Thank you. Apologies for absence and substitutions. I have apologies from Councillor Court and Councillor Leeks. No others? Councillor Tomlin.
Sorry, Chair, if it's the right time to bring it up, just to note that I did attend the viewing panel. The update paper does not refer to me being there. I was hiding under a cloak, but I was visible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tomlin. Urgent matters, I have none. Minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of March 2022 will be approved at the Development Control held on the 6th of April. So, planning applications for tonight, one of. Sorry. Thank you. Councillor McCormack is replacing Councillor Howard Sorrell. I'd forgotten that. Thank you for reminding me. Planning application 180 Culver Road, Basingstoke. Catherine, if you could introduce it.
Thank you, Chairman. Planning permission is sought for the demolition of the existing building at 180 Culver Road in Basingstoke, which is currently vacant following the relocation of services by Hampshire County Council to an alternative position within the town. And in its place, it is proposed to erect a single building rising over 2 and 3 stories to provide supported living accommodation as a specialist form of housing considered on policy CN4 of the local plan for persons who are or at risk of being homeless. Residents of the building would enter the accommodation under a licence agreement with provision for tailored support and training to enable the residents to staircase into longer-term housing tenancies off-site. The building would provide 23 ensuite rooms, arranged in clusters to share kitchen areas, and provide 8 emergency beds. The levels of occupancy and the management of the premises are to be secured by planning condition, as set out within your agenda. In addition, provision is made on site for communal multi-purpose space for living and training purposes, as well as staff facilities and storage. Externally, there will be provision for on-site car parking and drop-off, and a closure of the site to provide external amenity space, with enclosure by railings to the north and east and a wall to the west. Hedging would sit adjacent to the boundaries, and the site also provides new hedge planting and further planting throughout. To the east, the development would also provide a new footway to extend along the highway edge. And if I turn members' attention to the update paper, so at the beginning there is an update summarising the viewing panel, and of course we will note Councillor Tomlin was also on that viewing. We have received a further comment from Hampshire County Council as the lead local flood authority, who is our statutory consultee for drainage purposes. And these comments are in response to further representations that we received to the application following the completion of the officer report. Those representations that we have received have been summarised within the update paper. So this includes 1 representation received in support of the application and 3 representations expressing objection. Members will also note in the update paper there's been a slight alteration to the recommendation, and where there's been a change to condition 12 and the deletion of condition 13. So this is a revised drainage condition which essentially amalgamates and slightly amends those previous 2 conditions. At the end of the update paper, member will note there's some officer comments, and these pick up on mainly the questions and queries that were raised at the members' viewing panel, so hopefully we have addressed members' questions. I've got nothing further to add, other than just to indicate that the application is recommended for permission, subject to conditions and informatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. If we could have our first speakers, which is Mr. Ashforth, Mrs. Henderson, and Mr. Orchard, if you could come forward to the speakers' chairs, which are the 3 in front of your councillors. If you'd like to sit down, please. Okay, you have 4 minutes between you. I will remind you when you have 1 minute remaining, and as there are only 2 of the 3 of you, if you can remind us of your names as a start. Thank you. The microphone button is on the deck in front of you.
I'm Dave Orchard. I live opposite 180. I have to say the proposed building would be too big, too tall, too cramped on the site. We've read through the planning application and found it to be poorly written, with numerous errors, inconsistencies, contradictions. There are conditions which cannot be implemented because they conflict with other conditions. And it gets worse. It seems that 2 saints have set out to mislead us. The intention tonight is to prove that to you. Thank you.
Hi, Kenton Ashforth. I'm 32 Caldell Road. We're north side of 180. I believe that everything I'm going to say is fact, despite 15 months of a lack of information, misinformation. I've lived there for 23 years, pretty much to today, and I'm currently 3/4 of the building we see is 9'2" or 2.99, just 6 feet away. There's many windows overlooking us, with the viewing angle of the other buildings. The end will be hugely restrictive.
180 cars extra doing these journeys it's going to make it really bad for Fairfields and.
It's taken up because no one's 180. I wasn't there, but I believe everyone there, and people have gone to work.
Double yellow line.
Thank you, Level. Appreciate it. Steve Benson and Daniel Wright. On you when you have 1 minute remaining, and the buttons are on the microphone decks in front of you.
Colleagues are here in case of any questions. First of all, thanks very much for giving us the opportunity to address you this evening. And this eveningness in and around Basingstoke drive this proposal. Numerous sites were considered as part of the process, but given 180 Culver Road's former use, which is not a million miles away from the proposal, most people don't want to live on industrial estates or pushed away from society. They want to be part of a community from which they've come, to aid in their journey back to a more structured lifestyle. They need to be and feel part of a community to which many will hope to give something back. May Place is no longer a suitable home for people, not just because of the building, but because it's amongst the hustle and bustle of daily life in the town centre, which for many proves too much of a distraction or negative influence. The site was chosen because it's on the edge of a strong existing community, whom we believe can and will help support those who are struggling. Our designers went through numerous versions that moulded and changed based upon constructive feedback from neighbours, councillors, your planning service. Several rounds of pre-application conversation occurred between our architects and both the planning officers and urban design team. The building has been designed to respect neighbouring buildings, minimise overlooking, and give breathing space to the much-loved specimen tree, which is to be retained. Over the last 2 years, and during an unprecedented time of pandemic, we went above and beyond what would normally be considered necessary with regards public consultation for a scheme of this size. Not only have informative drawings and operational details been widely and openly shared and discussed with local residents and interested stakeholders, but one-to-one consultations were held with those who wished to do so. Yes, many concerns were raised, along with much support, but we've listened to that feedback and made changes, such as the relationship to neighbours, reducing the height of the roof, including a dedicated vehicle drop-off space to remove the likelihood of pressure on the neighbouring roads. The new footpath to the east will also improve connectivity around the site, and we've ensured the large feature tree to the northeast corner remains and is protected.
You have 1 minute remaining.
The building covers an almost identical area of land as the existing young offenders unit. Yes, it's taller, but it's been designed within normal and recognised planning guidelines. It steps down to address the adjoining properties while standing taller and proud on the corner to celebrate its location and draw upon recognised urban design techniques. Whilst wanting to sit comfortably within its surroundings, we also want a building that has a sense of place and pride within the community. The existing former young offenders unit is a bland, uninspiring building that has outlived its purpose and is in danger of becoming an increasing nuisance of itself in the neighbourhood. The covenants associated with the land have always restricted the use of the site to similar need, one that aids in the rehabilitation of those with current issues. This new modern state-of-the-art building will give the site a new sense of purpose. There are 23 bedrooms, and yes, overnight visitors are permitted, but on a limited basis, which will be controlled and managed. The likelihood is there will be a handful of these at any one time.
Could I ask you to wind up, please?
Okay, I think we'll leave it there, and can I just say thank you for considering this application.
Thank you. Could turn your microphone off, please. Thank you. Questions for the Speaker? Councillor Freeman, followed by Councillor McCormack, followed by Councillor Hussey.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, can you tell me how many staff there will be in the building during the daytime and overnight, please?
That will be set out, obviously, in the conditions of the, but we will always have 2 people on site at any one time.
And I was regarding risk assessment of occupants. Will it be all the occupants that are risk assessed, or are there some occupants that won't undergo the risk assessment process?
All of the people living in the service will be nominated by the local authority, and there will be risk assessments. That's our procedure in all of our dwellings.
What about if they are part of a couple? Do both members of the couple get assessed, or is it just the member that's referred to you?
If it's a couple and they're both living in the accommodation, they would both be risk assessed. We wouldn't necessarily be risk assessing visitors to the service, although we may well do so on occasions.
Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. We have a few other schemes ongoing at the moment, two in particular in Winklebury, that are holding public meetings. And while it's commendable that you've taken an awful lot of time to go for one-to-one consultations, I'd just like to ask, why did you not have a public meeting on this?
I think the answer really has been to do with the pandemic. We have had a number of various different consultations. We've gone really over and above on that. There was one meeting in this very building which involved a number of residents and leading officers and members of the council. So that there was dialogue, but it was obviously affected by the pandemic.
Just one more question for me. So I take it you're of the view that what's on offer is a vast improvement on the May Place site. Have you been constrained by this site in any way in your offering that you're putting forward for this new facility?
No, I wouldn't say so. It's I think when we first were introduced to the site, we really thought it was an excellent site for the type of service we wanted to provide there.
Councillor Hussey.
I wanted to ask a question about the ecological impact assessment and bats. What evidence did you find of bats in the vicinity?
I'm afraid we haven't got anyone here with that technical ability to answer that question at the moment, but I know all the requirements were submitted. I don't know whether anyone from the planning service can assist.
It's a little bit disappointing considering the protection that bats are offered, and there's whole sections referring to bats within the ecological report.
I think, Councillor Hussey, it would probably be best asked to the officer when we go to questions to officers.
Okay then.
Do you have a second question?
No.
Thank you. Any more questions to the speakers? Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, obviously you provide a very valuable service and got experience in this stuff. Have you ever any other properties where you're butting up to residential accommodation? Because in this case, I think it was at 6 feet or 2 metres. For instance, I'm thinking of one in, say, Newbury, where although it's near a community, there's about 150 metres between that and the nearest house.
Yeah, I would say nearly all of our very best services are in communities. As I described in my statement, the building you refer to in Newbury is exactly the sort of building we're trying to move away from, which is a big 60-bedroom hostel, which isn't the sort of type of accommodation we're trying to provide now. So this is the type of accommodation within communities that is very much what we're trying to achieve.
Any more questions for the speakers? Yep. Thank you very much. And if you could have a quick wipe down of everything you've touched. Our next speaker is Councillor Mamalani. Evening, councillor. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Chair. For the members who could not make the site visit, the entrance to the site is located in the cul-de-sac, a narrow service road immediately after a bend in Culver Road. Please refer to the figure 15 in your pack. This is the only vehicular access for 15 houses and 18 garages. The parking provision would be awfully inadequate. The so-called drop-off zone is a joke and would not be worth the effort of painting lines on the road surface. The design and suitability SPD topography section comments that new developers should use step-down slopes and should also minimize the need for unattractive features such as large retaining walls. As per the policy, this building would need to have an appropriate amount of space around it. As you can see, the proposed development violates every aspect of this policy by far. For the established community, the building would be overpowering, replacing a small and insignificant one which could only have been designed to fit and blend within the area. As per the urban design response dated 21st of January 22, it states that they have no objection, and while concern had been raised in previous responses, they had now been satisfactorily addressed. This is not the case. Although the original response dated 31st of August 2021, para 1.3 stated that the vast majority of the building on Culver Road are two-story houses, this distorts the situation. If you look at figure 10 in your pack, and you will see that there is not a single building on Culver Road above 2 stories. There is no precedent for 3 stories, let alone something like this building sitting at such a dominant point at the top of the hill. There are other problems with the urban design stating that their concerns have not been satisfactorily addressed, but they too have not. A given mitigation for the height of the building is that there is a change in the level of 2 meters on the side down from the pathway of Culver Road, but that is a little consequence. If you look at figure 11 and 12 in your pack, from this viewpoint, the top of the proposed building would be a huge 14.4 meters above you. It would literally tower over every immediate neighboring property and those below. The proposed building would be too tall, too overpowering, and out of keeping with every other building in the estate. Just compare figure 11 in your pack with figure 12. This is the view that two saints didn't want you to see.
You have 1 minute.
See how the building would tower menacingly over all the houses alongside. There is more that can be said about that. In closing, I ask you to look at the proposals in line with Parking Policy 2018 to consider the dangers of visiting vehicles and to think about the many negative impacts on the neighborhood, the overpowering size of the proposed building, the overall height of the proposed building, the 3-story, especially considering the position up at the hill, the problems voiced by urban design that seem to have been swept under the carpet. 180 Culver Road is not the right location for the building of this size, and I would really appreciate your decision to refuse this application. Thank you, Chair and the members.
Thank you. If you could turn your microphone off, please. Questions for Councillor Mamalanani? No? Thank you very much. If you could have a quick write down. You are doing. Our next speaker is Councillor James. Good evening, Councillor James. You have 4 minutes. I will remind you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you. Good evening, committee. I've been a councillor for 14 years. This is my 3rd visit to DC. Because generally speaking, development happens in the town centre area, the urban area, with little notice or concern. Yet tonight you have an application that's attracted a petition of over 200 people. It's attracted comments, people taking the time out to log on, of 69 people, a number of speakers here tonight. This is not a festival of NIMBYs, this is genuinely residents incredibly concerned about what is going to happen to their neighbourhood as well as the application. But whilst other councillors, the local councillors, are all here to talk about their communities, I want to talk about the other community mostly. I want to talk about the homeless. So I've spent 16 years as well working with people who are very much the May Place people, working with drug users, those released from prison, etc. And I want to appeal to you that this application is very poor for them. You can see already the hostile reaction from the neighbourhood. These people are not going to be made terribly welcome. Earlier comment was made that somehow it's a good idea to put these people in the community. At the same time, the application says this is short-term accommodation. They're going to be moved on as quickly as we possibly can. It's not like they're going to have time to join the Culver Road Book Club and really engross themselves in the community. So I think the weight of that argument is very poor. I also want to reference the fact that the application says within it, page 44, I believe, that as a committee, you are not to consider alternatives. The same must apply, of course, if you are, that you can't consider the lack of alternatives either. You have to consider this application on merit, regardless of whether or not it's difficult to find an alternative. So we've got to stick with the merit. Now, in support of this, the officers' papers talks about how this will be a great opportunity for the council, who already exist, to work with All Saints, who already exist in exactly the same way they already work with them at the current Two Saints run hostel in May Place. We're not inventing some new service. Today, there were people from Two Saints doing great work helping the most vulnerable in our community. Tomorrow, they will do the same, regardless of what comes out of this committee tonight. It's going to carry on. So I'd ask you to add no weight at all to the argument that this is helping the homeless, because we're not creating much more space than they've got at the moment. I accept what they've got at the moment is awful. So I'd like to ignore any weight to that one. I think the biggest challenge with this development, the bulk, is actually it doesn't help the homeless at all. A lot of the concerns around crime seem to have been addressed but steered towards we're going to put a camera outside and we're going to put a camera inside. That doesn't protect the community. At the moment, the current hostel is covered by 24/7 CCTV, monitored 24/7 by a big room in Festival Place. We do not live in a binary world. The people in this hostel are not just... We're not binary, we've not got criminals and we've got victims. Most of the people
You have 1 minute.
Most of these people have been victims themselves. The reason they migrate to town centres is they feel safe. They feel comforted by the fact that CCTV is being observed, crime is being prevented. They're not going to feel safe in this environment that you're creating. They are going to be at risk. If you're a drug dealer and you go to Basingstoke Town Centre to sell drugs in May Place, you've got to park on double yellow lines, you don't want to do that. Give your number plate when you park in Central Car Park, you don't want to do that. It becomes very difficult. You can whiz up Culver Road, you can sell your drugs, you can exploit the residents of this hostel, no problem at all. So I think the supporters, I don't think any drug dealers came tonight to talk in support of this, but I'm sure they're very pleased about the idea. So I think please consider the homeless. This is a compromised development. You heard earlier, lots of years of looking at this development. The original application was even bigger. They've had to compromise, downsize, reduce scale to fit the development within the limits of what the officers might allow. Of course, that means compromise. That means this site is smaller than they wanted, has less provisions than they wanted. One interview room is not going to support 24 residents through their needs. So I think it's an appalling application for them, appalling proposal for them, as well as it is for the residents of Culver and Cordell Road. And I'd ask you to reject it tonight.
Thank you. Could turn your microphone off, please. Questions for Councillor James. Councillor McCormack.
Thank you, Chair. So you mentioned that the proposals, in your view, are inadequate. What additional facilities do you think are essential, given this is a constrained site they've had to make do? What additional facilities do you think are essential that make this a unviable site or a totally inappropriate site?
The amount of communal space, because again they've had to compromise the design, they've reduced it down. If you look at the only sort of common room, it's not exactly conducive to having 8, 9, 10 residents in there at the same time. Certainly not if social distancing comes back. It's too small. One interview room. Does one interview room really sort of mean that you can work with these people throughout the day. You can have different services coming into the site to work with them. I don't think you can, because you've got one interview room. It's a nightmare to book. You need more space to do that kind of work. There's no real space for group work without closing down the only communal space that's available. So the site lacks a space. Outside, they've got a small courtyard area that sort of goes out into the green. It's not a great space to be in. Most of it's the vulnerability in that, in the environment of being in Culver Road, well then they're not protected. But there's no space in there to do the rehabilitation work. I'm a bit puzzled by the sort of 4 homes per kitchen. That seems an awful lot for 2 staff to maintain. I should also mention about the facilities at the site. Again, the committee need to rule out anything relating to the staffing. I know some conditions can be placed on it, but they can easily be amended. The staffing is not governed by planning consent, it's governed by budgets. For anyone who doesn't know, I think it's important the committee hear this, vulnerable people are the responsibility of the county council, homeless people are the responsibility of the borough council. So it's co-financed, it's co-funded.
Councillor James, could you restrict your speech
to
answering the question that was asked rather than extending your speaking
time? The question is
time?
related to facilities, and the facilities include the support on offer. All I'm going to say is that Hampshire County Council are currently consulting on how they can reduce spending on support of the homeless at this very moment in time, so I don't think the committee should have any weight to any glorious ideas about what support may be on offer. 2 saints are brilliant, but they're contained by budgets.
Any more questions for Councillor James? Thank you, Councillor James. If you can write down. And Councillor Jeans. Good evening, Councillor Jeans. You have 4 minutes. I will warn you when you have 1 minute remaining, and your microphone is already on.
Thank you, Chair. As a resident of Kings Furlong, I can confirm that my local community absolutely opposes this development. In fact, there were 176 objections raised. The National Planning Policy Framework makes very clear the government's commitment to create accessible environments where crime and disorder and the fear, and that's the most important word that you need to hear this evening, the fear of crime does not undermine quality of life or impact community cohesion and resilience. Yet what we see this evening is a proposal for a building which will absolutely contradict every single one of these points. In addition to this, our own policies state that proposals should have regard to the density, scale, layout, appearance and relationship to neighbouring buildings. The Basingstoke and Dean Design and Sustainability SPD clearly lays down the rules that buildings must positively contribute to a street scene, having regard for such issues as overlooking, overshadowing, maintaining access to natural light and amenity spaces. Our own policies state that schemes must result in improvements in residents' overall quality of life and local environment. The reduction in quality of life for neighbouring residents would be phenomenal. The Hampshire Police and Crime Commissioner states that she wants people to live, work and visit without fear of crime. Please be clear, though, we are not NIMBYs. This is not only on the grounds of fear of antisocial behaviour, but also the sheer scale of the building. For those of you who missed the opportunity to undertake a site visit, I can inform you that the building itself would sit at the top of a hill, dominating the skyline and towers over adjacent properties. I'm sure that those seasoned councillors amongst you will be familiar with the 25-degree rule in BR 209 to establish the loss of light suffered through the windows of an existing building by a planned new development. This is shown on figure 7 in your pack. The current building is well within keeping with those guidelines. However, the proposed development would take that sightline to 42 degrees, again in figure 8. This document, BR 209, Site Layout Planning for Daylight and Sunlight, is published by the Building Research Establishment. When deciding on planning applications, local authorities are guided by the tests laid out in this document, which sets standards for good design. The document is not mandatory. Councillors should note that what has happened is that after a new building has been erected and loss of light confirmed, the existing occupant is able to sue the owners of the new building and have it demolished. The pathway which runs along the northern side of the site is a main through route to 5 schools, all within a few minutes' walk. Local residents have counted many children using this route with their parents each morning and afternoon. There's also a playground approximately 50 metres away, again very popular with those same school children and recently renovated. Several parents have commented that they would have to find an alternative route to take their children to school. The most
have 1
obvious
minute.
now is, thank you, to use the car. The roads outside of the school are rammed every morning and afternoon. More cars is not ideal, in line with our plan to deal with the local declared climate emergency. It's also been noted that when walking into town, you could take an alternative route in order to avoid the people who make you feel uncomfortable. But when you live on the doorstep of a building like this, it's impossible to avoid. This proposal will drive fear into the heart of the local community. Two saints have stated that there will be plans for daily sweeps around the building to clear up anticipated discarded drug paraphernalia. Presumably that would only cover the perimeter of the building, ignoring the gardens of neighbouring houses, which would be the most likely route of disposal. Do we wait for a serious incident, from a needle stick injury to a child, or animal for that matter? Do we wait for predatory behaviour to number 32's 3 teenage daughters by one of the occupants? What would it take for us to reconsider? In closing, I ask you to look at this proposal in line with planning policy, irrespective of the potential social issues and reduction in quality of life for local residents.
Can I ask you to wind up, please?
180 Culver Road is not the right location for a building of this size, structure and occupation, and I would welcome your decision to refuse this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Turn your microphone off, please. Questions for Councillor Jeans? Councillor McCormack.
Thank you, Chair. Do you see any good aspects of this scheme?
I absolutely accept that there needs to be local provision for our homeless community. That goes without a shadow of a doubt. And certainly improvements need to be made to the current establishment where they're residing. But 2 metres away from number 32 Cordell Road, it is absolutely not the right place. The overshadowing from this building, it will wipe out all natural sunlight to number 32. The fear in the local community, you saw how many people were outside demonstrating. My neighbours, and I can put my hand on my heart here and say, my neighbours, I live adjacent to Culver Road, they are terrified of what will be on their doorstep.
Councillor Jeans, the question was, do you see any good in this? Could you answer that question directly, please?
Absolutely not.
Thank you. Any more questions for Councillor Jeans? No? Thank you, Councillor Jeans. And Councillor Michael Howard Sorrell. You have 4 minutes. I will warn you when you have 1 minute remaining. You put your microphone on, please.
Start again. Good evening all. I'll be talking about waste, pollution, climate change and drainage issues. Waste. Joint Waste have raised concerns about waste disposal provisions, requesting they be doubled. Commercial waste services will need to be engaged to do additional collections. Joint Waste have also asked for the waste storage area to be moved closer to the road in front of the bike store. However, houses of multiple occupation Chapter 7 refuse storage requires that a well-designed storage area which minimises visual impact and must not be in an overly prominent position. These two requirements are in direct conflict. Furthermore, the architects have not allowed enough space for the required number of bins. Pollution. Pollution from this site will be in the form of light and noise. The predicted noise levels exceed the WHO criteria for nighttime nuisance, and this despite the report not considering many important factors. Regarding light, there is currently very little artificial light in the area, just a handful of street lights, which are automatically extinguished during the small hours of the morning. However, the proposal contains around 53 large windows. By necessity, bright security lighting would be used for the special purpose of the hostel, which would further impact the amenity of the surrounding households. Climate change. The NPPF states development should improve the environment, mitigate climate change and adapt to its effects. This is recommended in several different documents, which the application should have followed. However, apart from an intention stated in the design and access statement to incorporate green technology, there are no green features whatsoever included in the planning application. Drainage. This issue is extremely complex, so please do ask questions. Please refer to Figure 15, the plan diagram in the pack residents delivered to you, to assist in understanding the many problems. The proposed drainage system would be ineffective and possibly dangerous. The design should have been completely defined, then checked and approved by an independent specialist geotechnical engineer before full planning approval was sought. This has not been done. In accordance with BRE 365, there should have been 3 separate infiltration tests performed. Only 1 test was conducted. Looking at figure 15, you can see that following removal of the cherry tree in the southeastern corner of the site, 3 new trees are now planted in that area as per the requirements of the tree report. Urban design also requires trees to be planted in that corner to hide the waste bins. However, the proposed drainage design provides a drain pipe, the blue dotted line on figure 15, to collect rainwater around the northern and eastern sides of the building, leading to a large underground suds soakaway in the very same southeastern corner. This cannot be allowed. Trees must not be planted on top of a suds soakaway. The roots would enter and break up the plastic crates, and then the ground would collapse into the crates. This fact means the urban design requirement cannot be met. The soakaway should provide an inspection access hatch. This has not been provided. There is no separation at all between the soakaway and the new pavement, roadway, or hard standing. Separation is to avoid erosion of the chalk in the ground around the soakaway crates and is required by Syria C574. Erosion would lead to subsidence underneath the pavements and road above. To conform with Syria, for the soft soil type found on this site, the separation distance should be 10 metres. Almost unbelievably, the author of the report admits the standard 5 metre separation given in this plan is in breach of Syria requirements.
You have 1 minute.
Thank you. You should also note there is no drain to collect rainwater on the western and southern sides of the building. This rainwater would have nowhere to go except to make puddles in the building's courtyard. This would lead to damage to the building's foundations, and also to the foundations of the neighbours in 179 Culver Road. The Vortex separator needs to be inspected at least twice a year. The design has placed a fence and hedge right over this device, making inspection impossible. As we have demonstrated this evening between the 3 of us that have spoken and the residents, this application is poorly thought out, self-contradictory, unfit for the area or for its stated purpose, and should be refused. If you are minded to do so, you may refuse on policy grounds EM10 due to loss of light and amenity as well as overlooking, with further thought given to waste disposal and parking concerns, and EM12 due to light and noise pollution. Beyond this, huge flaws in the drainage plans make this proposal not only unfit, but dangerous.
Thank you. Questions for Councillor Howard Sorrell? Councillor Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, can you explain what is a Vortex separator and why does it need an inspection hatch?
Sure, I've got that answer somewhere because I'm not an expert. Can I explain a little bit of context around what it leads to? Because the Vortex separator relates directly to the suds. So can I explain what the suds is? Because I know that's not a direct answer.
You need to keep it fairly brief.
Okay. Well, I'll start with the Vortex separator. Rainwater running down the eastern side of the site via the drain incorporates a vortex separator which traps sediment in the pipe before the soakaway is reached. This needs to be inspected twice a year so that any debris or sediment can be removed and efficiency isn't impaired. I have a direct reference actually, paragraph 7.1 of the Flood Risk Assessment and Drainage Strategy Report subscribes to this requirement. The vortex separator needs clear access to allow this, possibly even enough space to get a vehicle nearby for when it is open for maintenance. A fence and hedges will be planted right over the top of the vortex separator, making maintenance impossible. Now, the SUD soakaway, SUD stands for Sustainable Drainage System, and the soakaway is there to collect water that is that comes off the building via the various gutters and drains and so on before it can soak away into the ground around the building, because the ground around the building isn't as permeable as would be required for the amount of water that will be caused by such a large structure. So,
thank you. Any more questions? Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. I think this question has been partially answered. Not having an inspection hatch on the soakaway, tree roots, I've had a personal experience on my property of tree roots and drains. So what potentially are the consequences? I know the answer myself, but perhaps you could explain to the committee and the public that the consequences of not having this, not having regular inspections when you've got trees and roots in a drainage area. What can we expect?
So the suds is essentially, the way it's been described to me, again, not an expert, is a series of things that look like milk crates. They're just big plastic boxes they dig it out, put these crates in, and it creates a void under the ground with obviously some structural support from the plastic. Now what can happen, obviously, is the tree roots will grow into this, and because you shouldn't plant a tree on top of it, they're not designed to withstand the roots or the weight, and the structure of the suds will be broken up and will result in, like I said earlier, subsidence can happen. And because of the location on the site in the southeastern corner, right next to parking areas, roadways, and there's hard standing for a bike shed, I think, and for bins, all of that is very much at risk of being damaged if the tree roots are allowed to grow unchecked into the suds. So you can't have the trees and the suds in the same place. It's just not feasible for any architect who knows what they're doing, at least.
Okay. Any more questions for Councillor Howard Sorrell? No. Thank you, Councillor Howard Sorrell. We have no more speakers, so questions to officers. Hopefully, most of you have asked questions before the meeting. So, Councillor Hussey.
Back to the bats. So you're prepared, are you? When you read the ecological report, it talks about desktop studies and various things, and gives a reason as to why they didn't find bats on the day, because they couldn't get up to the height because of asbestos and so on. But prior to this meeting, I spoke to one of the residents about bats because this intrigued me. And all the residents said, yes, bats are common around there. And whether they roost or drink or what, I don't know, but they're in the tower on top of the existing building. So when we demolish that, they will be disturbed. What information can you give me about the bats and measures to protect them so that they don't get disturbed when the building is demolished?
So, in considering the issue with regards to bats, I've pulled up the ecological survey that was submitted with the application, and of course there is a summary of that within the report. So, in considering the premises itself, there was a building assessment which undertook the main building and also the separate detached garage. And I will just quote from the report itself. I am at paragraph 4.41 on page 15. And at the bottom of that particular page, it indicates that the building is well sealed with no features suitable for roosting bats, such as gaps at soffits. Therefore, the building was assessed to be of negligible suitability for roosting bats. And the wording is very similar for the same for the garage. So again, it says, for the garage, the building is well sealed and does not contain any features suitable for roosting bats, and therefore has been assessed as being of negligible suitability for roosting bats. Now, the report does continue, that does indicate that the surrounding site does have potential for foraging and commuting for bats. So there are likely to be bats in the area, but in terms of the actual physical building, it was deemed not suitable to have bats.
So back to my question, is the residents say that it's not just suitable, which is in theory, in practice it is suitable because they see them. And they see them around the building, around the water tank, which hasn't been examined, so we don't know whether they roost there or drink there or what. So we have information where residents allege that bats are seen on a common, and there's nothing in this study apart from hypothetical and stating the law, but it's nothing about observation. Well, and I think that's a gap in the report.
In terms of the report, this is looking at the ability for the bats to actually be roosting inside the building. So it does mean that it is quite possible that there could be bats circulating the building and flying in and about the building, but not actually roosting inside the building, which is the area of concern. And of course, the survey the information you have before us has been subject to consultation with our biodiversity officer. They have reviewed that and they have not deemed it necessary for any further surveys to be carried out. However, what we do have in the recommendation is a condition, I think it's number 11, to require mitigation to be carried out and further bat provision to be made in the site to actually encourage the bats to use the site in the future. We also have an informative, if I remember correctly, which, I mean, that highlights a bird nest, but again, we will draw parallels to any protected species. So should there be protected species found on site, then there is other legislation which would deem their protection and other actions that they would need to take. So it's not just sitting within planning in terms to protect the bats, there is also the Wildlife and Countryside Act.
Any more? Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Do you have any lighting of the site and the lighting impact on the local community that you could share with us, please?
Would you be referring to existing lighting or proposed lighting?
Proposed.
The proposed lighting, I believe that is contained within a condition seeking further details, and that would be condition number 8, which is on page 68 of your agenda, which is requiring further details to be submitted to the local planning authority for approval, and that would include the lux levels, which is the brightness levels, and a plan showing the position, type and extent of the lighting over the area to be lit. And that would give us further opportunity to review the lighting to ensure that it is not likely to cause harm to residential amenity, but also to have regard to nocturnal animals such as bats.
Councillor Tomlin.
So I have a second question, if I may, Chair. We had reference to the BR209 technical guidance about the angles and such like. So is this something that the urban design officer is within his remit to assess, and how binding is that guidance?
So, I mean, in terms of the impact of lighting, we do review that as part of our assessment of the application, but that particular piece of legislation is not part of our planning policy, so therefore isn't something that we can strictly impose or review an application against.
Any more questions for the officers? Councillor McCormack, followed by Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just looking at the update paper, picking up on Councillor Hussey's point on natural environment, protection of commuting hedgehogs. I don't know if there was any evidence discovered of hedgehogs. They're quite hard to find because they're nocturnal animals and tend to be hidden away during the day. But concerns expressed in the update about the solid brick wall and an ecology report recommending no lighting on site, which conflicts with the requirements for security lighting. So I just wanted to understand what could be done to mitigate against, what's the risk with hedgehogs if we've got all these brick walls, and what mitigation measures might have been considered?
So the ecological report that we've previously referred to in discussion with Councillor Hussey actually picks up that this site is likely to be a foraging habitat for hedgehogs. So in response, again, I've just referred to the condition about external lighting, which will enable us to have a look at the impact on nocturnal animals. But I'd also bring your attention to condition 22 on page 71 of your agenda. And when you read through that condition, you will note that further details of the boundary treatments are for further consideration to us. And at the second bullet point down, you will note that we are seeking the inclusion of suitable sized gaps, corridor at ground level, e.g. for hedgehogs. So we are looking to ensure that those routes can be maintained on site.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Catherine, I understood that the lighting and shading codes are part of national policy and relate to national design codes and national design proposals, like policies that have gone through. So they would apply in policy through that route. At least that's my experience of them. And while they're not directly related specifically to our local plan policy, they are nonetheless, as I understood it, listed nationally, and they are applicable.
I mean, I would indicate that they are a material planning consideration. We do take into account and we do assess lighting and shade, and we have that good understanding of where light and shade is likely to fall. And again, you can pick up on some of the photos in the presentation where light and shade is absolutely falling already in relation to the existing building, and also the trees on the site. So we would take that into consideration, but the actual specifics of that legislation is a material consideration at the end of the day.
Thank you. So on the basis of that being a material consideration, and we've had evidence this evening suggesting that the impact is of a much greater extent, the 45-degree aspect and so on, was that taken into account in your analysis? Where did the urban designer come to a view on that, given that it is so out of keeping with that national policy?
I have to admit, I don't know here and now that a particular assessment has done against those particular issues. But if I draw members' attention maybe to the layout of the site, I might be able just to talk about where the light and shade is likely to fall throughout the day, if that would assist members. Okay, so what you have before us, that'll do. So what you have an existing site with a sort of facing south, where you would have the 2-storey, and then you extending into 3-storey to the north, and again you have that change in ground levels, where you have the sun would rise in the east and extend round to the west, the shadow would fall in the opposite direction. So what you would have, for example, the shade from the existing building extending to the north across its own site, as would, for example, 179 and that terrace that you see to the southwest, their shade would fall to the north across the public open space. Then again, for example, when you're looking at 32 Caldale Road as an example, you would have shade falling to the east in the morning, and then that would move round as the sun moves in the opposite direction and would fall across towards its own garden to the rear in the afternoon hours. And then you also have to take into account site aspects that are being retained. And in particular here, you have the mature sycamore tree, which sits to the south, for example, of 32 Caldale Road. And then again, that is another aspect that would cast existing shade we have to take into context when we're considering the impact. So the new building would cast additional shadow. So it would be falling to the east in the morning, so largely across the public open space, and then extending towards the north, so for example, through midday, and then as you continue through the afternoon, falling towards the west. So a lot of the shade cast would fall across the existing garden, the open space, and where you get those longer shadows in the day, it will start to creep towards the shadow also cast by the tree, and then you're also looking at the shadow cast by the existing built form, for example, the existing properties, and also their own boundary treatments, maybe sheds or outbuildings in their own gardens, would also cast shade. So we're not just looking at the building, we are looking at the building in its context against existing features that are already present. I don't know whether that would assist. Yeah.
Any more questions for officers? No, I have none, so thank you, Catherine. Debate. Councillor Godison.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm sure we all accept that this is the sort of facility which is very, very needed, and we also accept that the local community has a duty and a responsibility to provide this sort of facility for those less fortunate people than ourselves. I think I think the difficulty is if you start from the premise that one of the main functions of such a facility should be to reintroduce gradually into the local community those people who are lodged within it, then of course you do have difficulties, because that immediately means that it will need to be sited somewhere either next to or very close to a well-established, fairly major residential facility with shops and all the rest of it. I think that the difficulty I have here with this one is that, as I understand from comments that have been made, that large numbers of children do walk backwards and forwards past this facility, and really they have to, because I understand there aren't really alternative routes for them to take. I think that in itself suggests to me that sadly this facility is not in the right location, and this is not the right location for this kind of facility. I'll be very interested to hear what the rest of the committee have to say, but I have to admit that I'm going to find it quite difficult to support this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Godison. Anybody else? Councillor Freeman, followed by Councillor McCormick.
Well, from the initial site viewing, I had a fair few reservations reading the reports, and certainly here tonight, there's nothing really in there that I can support. The proposed distance between the new facility and 179 Culver Road is proposed to go down to 1.4 metres. Now, that in old money, because I'm no good with metres, is 4'6". It's shorter. The gap between the two houses is shorter than I am tall, and it's too close. It's too big. It's really going to impose, and the fact that it's right at the top of the hill means that anyone on the top floor is going to have a bird's eye view into everybody's private life, their bedrooms, their gardens. Although I do, again, as Councillor Godison said, we know we need this sort of facility, but it's far too big for the site. And the impact on the community, plus the fact that it's not really going to be adequately staffed, but then again, there isn't the space there to increase parking so that they can increase their staffing levels, even if they had to. There are so many things that are wrong with this application. It's a real shame, because we need these sorts of facilities in the town, but this is far too big for the site, and it is going to do a disservice to those homeless people that need an adequate service provision. This isn't it, I'm afraid. I can't support this application.
Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'd like to thank the residents for presenting tonight. It's a very brave thing to do. I'd also like to thank Two Saints for their presentation tonight. I think Councillor James was a little bit on the harsh side in criticising the facilities. I think it's a big step improvement on what's already on offer in May Place, which is not fit for purpose. But I have to say that on the basis, the preponderance of the evidence that we've heard tonight, I can't support this application. I am minded to move for refusal. I think I'll quite happily listen to other people, contribute to this, but I have a number of planning reasons in my mind based on the reasons for refusal cited to light. So light and noise pollution, loss of amenity, drainage, parking infrastructure, appropriateness of the location, and on balance, while this scheme does, represent a big improvement on the existing provision, is Culver Road really the right location? It's a cramped location. The impact on residents, you've heard tonight, I mean, the concerns they have of fear of crime and things like that are very real, even though they might not have, policies backing them up. I think there are plenty of other things expressed tonight that do have policy reasons. And on balance, I think the benefits do not outweigh the adverse consequences of this application.
Thank you. It's been moved for refusal. Is there a seconder? Councillor Faulkner. Thank you. We'll come back on the reasons. Councillor Hussey, followed by Councillor Tomlin, followed by Councillor Harvey. Councillor Hussey.
Can you put up the elevation comparison, please, and focus in on the top left? And you can't focus in? Wow. but I can hardly see it from here. If you look at the top left, thank you. Excuse my back, I'm not being rude. Looking at the top left, you can see the white building, which is 179 Culver Road. You can then see a gap to the grey building, which is the proposed building, and then you can see the red, which is the existing building. The existing building is 2.16 metres away from 179 Culver. I went out and measured it myself. I got a measurement from the officers and I thought, oh, I thought it was greater than that. So I went out, but you did it from the plans, I did it on site. Now, that's a 30% reduction in the gap between the existing and 179 and the proposed and 179. And because of the height of the building, we say it's two-storey, 179 is two-storey, but that's a false comparison because the stories are bigger. You can see that the windows on the second floor are higher than the eaves of 179. Now, looking at that gap, because the building is so tall, it has a narrowing effect. Visually, it is much closer. Can we turn now to a site and location plan? No, the coloured one, please, with the actual... Right, if you look at the gap between 179 and the proposed building, halfway along 179, there are doors opening. Now, we've just determined this is 1.6 metres, and you've got doors opening. They're almost touching the wall of 179. And people are going to be coming out there. So you've got a corridor with people, whether they're noisy or not, doesn't matter, but they're coming out, and the proposed building extends beyond the depth of the property of 179. Whereas the existing one doesn't. Can we now move to a slide which shows the west elevation, please? Existing. There's one in the pack somewhere. That's the one. Again, it's about visual impact. The existing building has got a low profile, and you can see all the trees above it. You've got a wide open vista. There's a sense of space, and the long linear form and the profile of that existing building helps to accentuate the width and the space. Now, can we turn to the slide which shows the proposed building? Same view. Now it's taken at an angle. It's not full on like the previous example, but you can see that due to its height, all those trees that you could see before on the ringway have gone. So the sense of space isn't there. It also brings together, because of its height and because it's wider, it brings together number 32 towards 179. The visual impact is more cramped in. And that's the word, crammed in. That's the one that matters to me. Because when we look at the officer's report, their view is that it makes efficient use of the site. Well, if you take the site in isolation, I would agree 100% with the officer's report. But in this location, when you look at it, it looks as though it's been shoehorned into a restricted space. It's not to do with measurements, it's the appearance. You've got the lack of the openness and the wide open space in the vista. So it's going to have a material impact on the community of the Cordale, Culver Road and that green triangle, which is like the village green, as it were. So there's a tremendous impact on that street scene. I'm not talking about from the main Culver Road that links Wessex Close all the way through to Cordale Road. I'm talking from within the community. So there is significant impact. So I would like to turn now to policies. I've got to read my policy here. In terms of EM1, we're talking about 1B, visual amenity and scenic quality, and the setting of a settlement, important views. Well, we're going to get rid of those. So it's contrary to policy EM1. I think the next one is fingers and thumbs. I've got some. EM10 is the one I'm looking for. One C states about positively contributing to the appearance of use of streets and other public spaces and to achieve appropriate housing densities. And in particular 1C, I don't think it contributes to the appearance of the street and public space. And 2A, it doesn't add to the sense of space and existing street scene. In fact, it has an adverse impact. And 2C, I don't believe that it does have a due regard to appearance of the surrounding area and the relationship to neighbouring buildings, landscape features. I just think it's contrary to a lot of our policies. Now, I'm not an expert on these policies, so I'm looking for guidance of some of the more experienced people like Councillor Harvey to perhaps help me out, or Sven behind me, or yourself, Chair. But based on our policies, I think this is a clear-cut case. It's not even a marginal decision. So I would vote for refusal and would second the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Hussey. We'll come back to the reasons for refusal before we go to the vote. Councillor Tomlin, followed by Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. That was elegantly put by Councillor Hussey. Yes, I too look at this. I actually quite like the design of the building, but it would be absolutely fabulous to get this built into one of our new sites coming forward in the local plan, because you could build it all around without the concerns of the overlooking, the shadowing, the street scene, the cramming in and the loss of it. So I think it's got merit, but not on this site. So I'll stop there and say that I can't support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thanks, Chair. I agree with Chris, Councillor Tomlin. You take this site and stick it in the middle of the town centre, and it wouldn't be out of keeping in the context of the town centre. It isn't in the town centre, it's in the middle of a residential estate. It is a total transformation of that estate to have this building built on the corner plot, so visually dominant, very, very prominent from all of the local residents surrounding it. And it isn't just a simple fact, I think, that it dominates the immediate neighbours, it actually dominates the estate if you look at the actual design of it. And that's the way we've got to consider it. I think we've got to be careful here and not throw everything at the wall. It isn't a piece of jelly that we want to stick to the wall and hope that something sticks. I think we've got to actually come up with proper, sound reasons that will hold up to scrutiny at appeal. And I hope that actually that this doesn't go to appeal, because I hope that the people would actually sit down and have a proper conversation about what the local community either would support, or if it is unsupportable, that this site gets used for something else, and that we actually see this facility go to somewhere where it could be built and could be supported. Because I don't think there's a desire not to support the actual aim here. It's about the physical application that is in front of us. It is the red line, as ever, that we have to determine as the planning committee. So when I look at the actual officer's report, and I note that the actual urban design officer says on page 51 that the development would bring a notable change to the appearance of this corner site with the alteration in footprint, massing, appearance, which has been subject of local concern, and goes on to say that the proposal would present an intentionally distinctive and functional design building of a scale that seeks to maximise the quantum of accommodation, then that is exactly what has happened. That is exactly what this proposal seeks to do. And it absolutely overdevelops the site in comparison to what existed, and it overdevelops the site in terms of actually what the site capacity, I think, can accommodate. The officer goes on to say that the building would therefore be visually different in the immediate context. However, in the absence of any planning requirement to replicate the existing design, all right, you don't have to replicate what's there, but what is being sought to replace it is dramatically different. And the pictures, I mean, look, the visuals show it. Anybody with any common sense will take one look at that and say that is hugely consequential to that community. I don't see how you could say any other than. So in my mind at the moment, I'm absolutely in support of rejection, and I am looking at EM10 as a core reason for rejection, because that relates to design and sustainability. The existing building, if you look at it, is subservient to the houses. This proposal is the exact opposite. It makes the houses subservient to that building. It is a fundamental opposite that we were creating, and so I just can't support it. But I'd looked at EM10 as my main reason for rejection, because I think that's the one that would stand up to most scrutiny at appeal. I don't think the parking is going to fly because it's within the policy, and I think in other regards we're just going to be careful we don't try and get too much on this so that effectively it then goes down at appeal. We want this to stick as a planning committee if we care about it in the way we're expressing.
Thank you. Anybody else want to come in before I bring Mike in? Mike, all yours.
Thank you, Chair. Just bringing it back to, if you finish debate and the motion, then it's just bring it back to Councillor McCormack, who proposed in terms of actually them, I suppose, being very precise about which ones of the issues that have been raised are to be taken forward as reasons for refusal in the motion. And I would just echo the point that Councillor Harvey has made, is about being precise about the ones which are genuine reasons for refusal, as opposed to ones that are necessarily still concerns but aren't necessarily reasons for refusal. And clearly as an officer team we'll assist in that as much as we can, Councillor.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So, yeah, I mean, the parking, I know that's been cited tonight, but if we're unsure as to whether the parking will stick, then I would not propose that we put forward that it's contravened CN6. But I think EM1, it's pretty obvious that the visual impact, the loss of amenity, loss of view, is definitely a consideration. And I think, you know, point little a, and EM10, high quality development, 1 small c, 2 small a, 2 small c, Councillor Hussey mentioned that. I'm also looking at policies SS2 and CN4 number 2, in as much as I think that the balance is such that the benefits that this scheme might bring are outweighed by the negative consequences. And I think that's the crux of this application. If it were in a different location, we might have approved it. But in this location, there has been so much said tonight against it that there is a very clear balance against approving the application.
Thank you, Councillor McCormack. On the second reason for refusal, just regarding policy SS2 and CN4, as I understand it, your concerns are about effectively the appropriateness of the location as almost as a matter of principle. Regarding that, I don't think policy CN4.2, whilst it does talk about location is appropriate, that's very much talking about it in terms of access to facilities, services and public transport. And if that is the case, that's fine in terms of obviously your motion, but I wondered whether actually your concern was more to do with the concerns that have been expressed about sort of social integration of the issue, which is what I understand it to be, and in which case I think that would fall more under policy EM10. Apologies, let me just bring that up. Policy EM10 1A, which is for the development to contribute to the provision of neighbourhoods and places for work and leisure that are well connected, accessible, safe, easy for people to find their way around, function well in practical terms. Is that the basis of that reason?
Yes, well, I think in terms of SS2, I mean, I know it's difficult with the pandemic, and they did try and engage one-to-one with, Two Saints tried to engage one-to-one with residents, but I think it was fairly self-evident fairly early on that there was residential angst, a large number of letters of objection, and I think if the policy had been adhered to, they would have quickly realised that. Also in terms of public transport access, well, the nearest bus stop is a quarter of a mile downhill down the road at the King of Wessex. It was mooted that this would be an appropriate location because of it being within walking distance of local facilities, mental health, etc., in the town centre, but you have to walk past schools to get to those. So I can see all sorts of conflicts there. Whether or not that can be enshrined in a reason for refusal that will withstand a planning inspector, you know, I do have a degree of doubt, but in my mind, at least, I think that the benefits are clearly outweighed by the consequences on those. But if there is any doubt about, you know, how much weight that would carry in appeal, I'm open to advice on that.
Thank you, Councillor McCormack. I recognise the point you raised in relation to policy SS2, which is the regeneration policy. So, in effect, what you're saying is that the policy says that those regeneration schemes will be supported where they would result in a demonstrable benefit to the local community. You're effectively saying the opposite to that. There wouldn't be any demonstrable benefit to the local community. I think that part of policy SS2 and the part that I read regarding policy M10 are the more applicable ones, as opposed to the principle under policy CN4 about accessibility to facilities. So I think it'd be SS2 and EM10, which would be the parts of that particular reason for refusal. And Chair, then it sounds like there are two reasons for refusal being proposed.
And I've got my doubts about the flooding, especially the Hampshire County Council mentions. I guess this is coloured by my own personal experience of having a collapsed drain and floods within the house, but I would imagine that the consequences of that will be seen most within sight. I'm not altogether sure about the neighbouring properties because of the slope of the hill, but it might have adverse consequences for number 179, which is downhill of it.
Thank you, Councillor. On the point of flooding and drainage, entirely recognise it as a very important issue, clearly locally as well. I think the key issue here in terms of whether it could be taken forward as a reason for refusal, the issues that have been raised have been specifically reconsulted upon to the lead local flood authority, and they've commented on that in the update pack. I know that still leaves some issues to be resolved through the planning condition in terms of exactly what is that final composition of relationship between the soakaway, the planting that would eventually go in and otherwise, but effectively what the recommendation is saying is that can be resolved through planning condition. And in a situation where something can be resolved through planning condition, then in essence it shouldn't be taken forward as a reason for refusal would be my advice.
I'll take that advice then.
Yes, please, Mike.
So, as I understand the motion, obviously Councillor McCormack will confirm, but there are two reasons for refusal. The first relates to the visual impact and loss of general amenity around the building and loss of views, the cramped form of development, contrary to policies EM1, EM10, and officers would always suggest in terms of if you're bringing forward a reason for refusal on those grounds, it would also fail the design and sustainability SPD. And then the second reason for refusal effectively is that the application would fail policy SS2 in terms of it being a form of regeneration which would not result in a demonstrable benefit to the local community, and in doing so there would also be issues raised under policy EM10 1A regarding the impact on the community, safe routes, etc.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded for refusal. Those in favour of refusal? No. It's unanimous. Yeah. Thank you. Catherine, could you confirm the recommendation?
That application has been refused for the two reasons that were described by Mike in terms of the development having an adverse visual impact and loss of visual amenity in the cramped form of development, harm of character and appearance of the area, contrary to policy EM1, EM10, and with reference also to the design and sustainability SPD. And a second reason for refusal where we're having regard to policy SS2 and EM10 1A, where the development would not result in a demonstrable benefit to the local community, and then picking up on the safe accessibility, etc. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, members, and thank you to the officers for all their input and advice, and good night.